Hi, everyone. Welcome. To the faces I don't know. I'm Michael Romali. I run our communications and public policy programs here at Philanthropy New York. And it is my pleasure on behalf of Philanthropy New York to welcome you here. Oh, God, that's my voice. My voice filtered through a computer through the online. It's kind of crazy. Okay, so as you may have just inferred from Vince's computer, we are live streaming this event, and people are going to be submitting questions if they're listening or watching online, and submitting questions through Twitter to the hashtag PNY event. So if you have any comments or questions throughout the event and you're too lazy to raise your hand, feel free to tweet it, and we will pose your question to the panel later. So before I introduce Vincent, who will introduce the panel, I would just like to say that Vince has a very special relationship with us here at Philanthropy New York. When he was at CERTNA, he was on our board and was in fact the chair of our board. And he has brought to our organization in the past 2 years since I've been here some of the most really fascinating, thought-provoking, and high-profile discussions we've had here. Just wonderful events, and so I'm very much looking forward to this discussion as well. And my first experience with Vince was before I even got here. I was running an organization called Public Policy Communicators of NYC, which is now a part of Philanthropy New York, and he did a really great session for that group on he moderated a program on net neutrality that was really immensely enlightening for everyone involved. So I am very excited to hand it over to Vince.
Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate being here, as always. And sometimes we just can't get off a topic, because we'll be talking about net neutrality again today, and we're going to talk about it until we get it right. So just stay tuned with us, folks. Anyway, thank you very much for providing this venue for a really interesting conversation. Thanks to everyone in the room and also everyone out in the Twitterverse. Just a brief comment about our process today. We'll jump right into the discussion with our panelists up in the front of the room to get the ball rolling, but we really want this to be a conversation with all of you in the room, certainly, and also to anyone who's watching us via live stream and communicating with us via Twitter. So we'll keep an eye on that, on those channels, and make sure that if you have a comment or a question in the room or outside the room, that we include that in our discussion. Now, we know, I mean, I can look around the room, and those of you who are watching through the lens can't see the folks who are here, but there's a tremendous amount of expertise in the room, too. So we've already scanned your phones for metadata and taken a look at your hard drives. So we know what you know, and we're going to, if you don't offer your comments voluntarily, we can call on you directly. So our hashtag, as always, just to repeat, is PNY event. Singular. And in terms of this panel, we have really an all-star panel. It's, I think, the highest caliber of the expertise in each of these categories. And in particular, for the funders in the room, we have with us Helen Brunner, who is the director of the MEDIACRACY Fund, which is really, in addition to the heavyweights of the media policy funding community, the Ford Foundation, Open Society, Park Foundation, and a handful of others. The MEDIACRACY Fund is really the authority on behalf of sort of everybody else to make those great investments in media policy work for those of you who might not have a full-blown program. So we're going to hear from her today. And I want to especially thank our friends at Common Cause, who have an important program in this area, and Gary Ferdman in particular, who initiated this discussion in the first place to have this discussion. And so thanks, Gary and colleagues from Common Cause, for getting us started on this path. And I just want to offer a personal recollection. It was about 10 years ago when I tagged along really to a lunch with a colleague at CERDNA where I ran the nonprofit sector support program to talk about a new organization, Free Press, which was going to be doing some really interesting work in civic engagement. And that wasn't really my program, but we were going to the Oyster Bar, and I love going to the Oyster Bar, so I went along anyway. They have these amazing pan roasts, which are to die for, or to die from. But anyway, I digress. So I went along, and what became immediately clear when I sat down to lunch with Bob McChesney was that this area of media policy, which I hadn't really given a lot of attention to, was an area that really impacted upon all of the nonprofit sector, and that whatever you do in the nonprofit sector, as a funder, as a foundation, as a nonprofit directly, there are impacts throughout media policy. And that remains true today. And for those of you who are in the New York area, some of you may be going to celebrate the Free Press 10th anniversary. It's 10 years of successes and struggles. They haven't gotten everything figured out. We're still working on net neutrality, but there have been some really remarkable successes in those 10 years. And I just want to invite Bob McChesney to offer a few recollections of founding and continuing the work for the past 10 years of Free Press.
Oh, thank you, Vince. And I should say, first of all, that Vince took it upon himself to learn about media policy making after that lunch. I remember that, and you talked to us several more times. And then he finally showed us the memo he wrote recommending CERDNA enter the field. And I don't know if you remember what I said to you, but I said, this is better than anything I could write. You had studied it so well. It was such an impressive memo, and you did so much due diligence. You asked all the right questions. It was a treat to deal with a funder who was that serious about their work and did it so well. When we started Free Press, there were a few basic propositions that we had in mind. First of all, that our media system isn't natural. It's the result of government policies, regulations, subsidies, licenses, a whole range of political decisions that are made that determine the nature of the media system. Secondly, the nature of the media system we had in the United States then and now was largely the result of policies that were made behind closed doors by very powerful interests with minimal public involvement. And then third, that was the reason we needed a group to come along, or a movement, a broader movement, not just one group, that would inform people and bring them to the table as participants in the policymaking process. And the result of that would be a better media system, better policies producing a better media system. As the great line goes, if you're not at the table, you're what's being served. And we had to get people off the table and at the table. That was the principle behind the group. The other idea behind the group was that the existing range of debate that public interest groups were fighting over then in Washington was very narrow range. It was a range that basically was the range countenanced by the commercial interests who owned the board, who controlled all the debates in Washington on telecom policy, on media ownership issues, really on virtually every issue we were concerned about. And what was crucial was, on one hand, we had 1 foot in Washington, up to speed on all the issues, participating at the FCC, at Congress, and wherever it was necessary, even in the court system, on the existing issues that were in place so that we could have the best possible outcome in the near term. But we also had to have at least a similar sized foot outside of Washington, drawing people into the process, educating them, and really captivating their imaginations that we could make the media system much better by giving an impression of options that weren't then continents inside Washington. We had to bring people from the outside to put pressure on so we have a broader range of debate within Washington than what the big companies were willing to comment. And so we saw it as you had 1 foot in Washington, 1 foot outside, one near term and immediate term, one really mid-term and long term. And those are how the very principle of the movement is Josh and John Nichols and I started at Free Press 10 years ago. And so just to close, I'd say that we had a tremendous amount of success, more than we ever imagined in Washington, especially during the second Bush administration, and especially because we had a great friend at the SEC, who's 2 people down from us right now, Michael Copps, who was one of the rare champions of the public interest to serve in the FCC in its less than august history, who made it much easier for us to accomplish the work we wanted to accomplish. But I think the problem we had then was that we put so much energy there because we were having such success in Washington that the grassroots organizing part of the work, which is really crucial to expanding the range of the debate, we only have so many resources. That didn't get the attention it needed. And now we're in the process, I think, of going back out and expanding that popular support for a broader range of issues so we can expand the range of what's being debated in Washington and win real victories that can substantively change and improve internet and media experience in America.
Great. So for our first topic, I think, of discussion, it is an election week, and we can provide antacids for any of you who are still dyspeptic from the experience. But, you know, I think that things have changed in recent years around media and the political system. And it's a particularly, I mean, we had an election this week in a relatively small number of localities in terms of governors and things like that. It wasn't one of the big elections, but still there's money flowing through the tubes, and we want to talk about that. In addition to the election itself, there was in the news the confirmation of the FCC chair last week, which was sort of held up by a political process. We want to talk a little bit about both of those things. So, Bob, if you could, I should also say that Bob has just written the book on this topic, Dollarocracy, and so tell us about how the intersection of money, media, and politics.
Yeah, I wrote Dollarocracy with John Nichols, my frequent co-author, and we've been talking about the relationship of media and money and politics since we became friends in the mid-1990s. After the Citizens United decision in 2010, we realized it was time to really look even more closely at what was going on. And I think that the subtitle of the book is how the money and media election complex is destroying America, because we think that most analysis underplays the significant role media and media policy has in our electoral system and in the problems that are associated with big money. First of all, you know, we spent, now at our latest count, we're up to about $10.5 billion was spent in the election in 2012, about double what was spent. This is for all races, local and national. Double what was spent in 2008. And just to get a sense of how much we spent, because I don't think Americans fully grasp this, Germany just had national elections, as you know, 6 weeks ago. For every dollar German politicians, parties, and movements spent per voter in Germany in their national elections, we spent in 2012 for our congressional and presidential races $34. We outspent Germany 34-1. And I think it's fair to say we have decidedly worse elections than Germany has. So more money makes worse elections, I think, is sort of the hypothesis you get from that, for reasons we chronicle in the book. But one of the reasons so much money is spent is that the vast majority of that money goes for TV political advertising. And much of that money ends up in the pockets of a very small number of local TV station owning companies, of which Craig can give the more precise numbers, Craig Aaron from Free Press, but it's less, maybe 6 or 7 companies that rake in the vast majority of this money, I think it's fair to say. And it's going to be a smaller number if a certain number of deals that are on the table right now are clear. And so we have these companies that the average local commercial television station got 2 or 3% of its revenues from TV candidate ads in 1992. 2 or 3%, small percentage. And the figure's been going up gradually, basically every election cycle since then. By 2012, and I don't have the final figures yet, but it depends on the station you look at, but I'd say the low end station's getting 20% of all its total revenues from TV candidate ads. At the high end, it's closer to 40%. So it's become this enormous cash cow that's made this industry extremely lucrative, that sort of was concerned about being in its death throes. And as these companies have made a fortune selling these TV candidate ads, much of which are the third-party ads triggered by the Citizens United decision, they've pretty much disbanded their public service legal obligations to provide covered debates, airtime for candidates in the local community, coverage of local races, which the courts and the FCC have defined as the single most important form of public service a broadcaster can do to justify getting its monopoly license from the government. So that's one part where it's a media story, and where Mike's going to talk specifically how the FCC has ways, I think, that it could, if it wanted to, intervene. The other part, and this is a sort of a central theme of my work, and I think increasingly of the media reform movement, is we had a great political journalism. The amount of money being spent in these asinine negative ads wouldn't have that much effect, because people have all sorts of information that would undermine the effect of this. But what we've seen is the money has increased at the same time in the last 15 or 20 years. The amount of resources going to covering journalism in this country, political journalism, have plummeted. We're really rapidly, like a parabola, we're rapidly approaching zero. In most every city I've gone to where I've looked into this issue, there are less than half the number of paid reporters and editors today than there were 20 years ago, in city after city. Most types of government aren't covered. Most races on the ballot are no longer covered. If you go to vote, your information is coming from these ads. In Illinois, to give one example from 2010, it's the most striking one, there was a primary in the Democratic Party to select who was going to be the lieutenant governor candidate. Now, in Illinois, lieutenant governor is an especially important position because we have a pattern of having our governors go to prison. Right. So whoever gets elected lieutenant governor is really got the job. It's really, you're electing your next governor, what you do when you elect lieutenant governor. And the guy who won the Democratic nomination was a guy who spent a couple of $1 million of his own money in a series of TV ads about what a great guy he was and how horrible his opponents were. And he got elected, and after he won the nomination, it came out that he had all sorts of troubles with the law. He beat up his wife. He had substance abuse issues. He's really shady business. And the Chicago Sun-Times and Chicago Tribune admitted, we don't have the resources to cover every race. That was one we couldn't get to this time. If you can't cover lieutenant governor in the state of Illinois, that tells you just what a pathetic state of affairs here with journalism. So when you look at solving the problem of quality elections, it is essential that we solve the problem of having the resources for independent, competitive, quality newsrooms covering our politics. Because without those, all the other stuff will only take us so far.
So I would just underscore one of the things that's changed in recent years is the very important Supreme Court decision on Citizens United. And that has, and this is amply identified in your book, which I really encourage people to look for. But that has fundamentally changed a kind of order of magnitude shift in the dollars into political advertising and the nature of that advertising. There's a project at the Wesleyan University on money and media. The Wesleyan Media Project. That's Ben Shute offering that. He knows because the Rockefeller Brothers Fund supported that along with the Knight Foundation. A really important project which demonstrates that there's a significant shift towards more negative advertising in the flood of new dollars into political advertising. And I think it is heartening to see that major funders are waking up to fixing the democratic process. But I think the one thing that the fig leaf, I think, that the Supreme Court offered on the Citizens United decision was, of course, you need disclosure. That with appropriate disclosure, money's no object. I mean, it doesn't matter. But we are not getting disclosure. And so, Michael Copps, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that problem and the potential solution to that.
Well, I'd be happy to. First of all, let me express my gratitude for being here today and my gratitude for all of you being here too. I'm delighted to be part of this distinguished panel, and Vince, salute you on all the great work you've done with Media Funders Group. Bob and I go back a long way because I got to the FCC just as a commissioner just about the same time Free Press was starting up. I had a chairman at the FCC who was not interested in us taking the arguments on media ownership and consolidation out beyond the Beltway. We didn't have a lot of funding for meetings. We did one or two, but I found this wonderful organization that was already out there doing some of these hearings and latched on to some of those. My friends at Common Cause were doing the same thing, some senators and congressmen, so we finally got the debate out into the grassroots, and I'm delighted to be here with Helen and all the great work. She's been such a stalwart defender of the public interest for so many years in trying to make sure that diverse communities and rural communities and others are all part of this new broadband and internet age. So it's a privilege for me to be here. Yeah, there is something we can do. You mentioned Citizens United, which was obviously an awful decision. But tucked away towards the end of it, 8 of the 9 judges effectively said, and I am paraphrasing because they didn't say this directly, if you don't like all this money that's going into political bloodstream, the antidote for that is disclosure. And they kind of left it there, maybe because some of them thought there wasn't going to be any disclosure legislation or anything like that anytime soon. But I had started at the FCC working with Chairman Janikowski, talking to Chairman Janikowski about taking a section of the Telecommunications Act that goes way back to the beginning of the FCC and even before that, that has to do with sponsorship identification. That if you run an advertisement on radio or television, people are entitled to know who is running that advertisement. And that applied to commercial advertisers, and it also applied to political advertisers and political commercials. Never really enforced. The FCC last visited this part of the Telecommunications Act, which is Section 317, and I hope you will all remember that, Section 317 in the 1960s, wrote rules for it, and those rules very clearly say the American people are decided to know who is trying to persuade them. Very clear in the rules, and it's very clear that there's statutory authority for that. Those rules have not been updated since the 1960s, but the rules are there. So there is a vehicle to do this kind of disclosure reform. It's a much better vehicle than any of the alternatives that exist, because are we going to wait for the president to introduce legislation to do something about this? I think that's going to be a wait. Are we going to wait for Congress to pass something like the Disclose Act or anything like that? That's going to be even a longer wait. But lo and behold, it turns out Section 317 is there. It can be very simply updated. If the commission had a will to do it, we could update it in time for the 2014 elections. That's probably not going to happen, but I hope it can. But certainly by 2016, and all it has to do is assert its authority that it's going to implement the rules, update them, because since the 1960s we have PACs and super PACs and all these other avenues of dark money coming into the political bloodstream. We can identify that so that no longer will it say this ad brought to you by Citizens for Purple Mountain Majesties and Amber Waves of Grain, but it'll say brought to you by whoever it is, and I don't care if it's conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat or what it is. The American people have a right to know. So imagine the difference that would make if citizens who were listening to these ads actually knew who was contributing, say 25%. If you contribute 25% for it, your name would be read. And 50%, you'd have all of those names listed. Does that solve the problem of big money in politics? Of course not. But does it shine the spotlight of public attention on a part of the problem? Does it demand fuller disclosure? Would it nourish a healthier civic dialogue and a small d democratic debate if people knew that Citizens for Purple Mountain Majesties and Amber Waves of Grain was really a chemical company that was dumping sludge into the Chesapeake Bay or one of the Great Lakes, or a company refusing to clean up a toxic dump? I think it would help. So I started suggesting this before the 2010 elections. I was not very successful in persuading the chairman of the commission then to do anything about it, and nothing much has been done about it since, except a public interest advocate named Andy Schwartzman, who probably many of the people in this room know, filed a petition at the FCC to get this done back in 2011. And it has since resided, as best as I can tell, in some dusty drawer in somebody's desk at the FCC, an FCC that is not sufficiently responsive to the process of citizen responding to citizen complaints. So I am hoping that the new FCC can be persuaded to do this. I don't think it'll be an easy sell, but I think it can be done. There is tremendous, I think, congressional support for it. Senator Rockefeller, Senator Nelson, others on the Senate Commerce Committee, Anna Eshoo in the House, Leader Pelosi, several others, and my hope is that they will help us move this issue along. Meanwhile, we need to talk about it publicly. And even if it doesn't solve that big issue of big money, if you could get this done, wouldn't that encourage people to say, lo and behold, there's something that can be done. There is a little step we can take that really helps to ennoble, if that's not too strong a word, our political process and enable our democratic dialogue. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Is there opposition to this? Yes. The FCC went up about 6 or 8 months ago to testify before the Commerce Committee. And we had circulated some information up there on Section 317, and they started asking questions about it, and it immediately became clear that there were powerful voices in Congress that wanted to do this. So this is actually something that may be accomplishable. It may actually be able to be done. Again, I'm not taking that to the bank or anything like that, but that's what we're going to be working on. But this issue needs to get known. This issue needs to be brought to the attention of the American people. I think it's a good issue. Everybody is fed up with the awful influence of big money in our public dialogue. I don't think it's particularly a red state or a blue state issue, just as many of these other media issues are not. So I think it's a good issue, and if it's achievable, so much the better. But there are people like when I talked about this hearing at the Commerce Committee, Senator Ted Cruz says, oh no, we're not going to go there. And when Tom Wheeler went up for his confirmation hearing, he asked Mr. Wheeler about this, Senator Cruz, and Senator Cruz said, if you mess around with this, this may cost you your nomination, and it may be very disadvantageous to the long-term viability of the commission that you aspire to be chairman of. So that occasioned, as some of you know, a hold on Mr. Wheeler's nomination. It occasioned a New York Times editorial a couple of weeks ago on this very subject. But I was delighted that in that editorial, the New York Times says the FCC has this authority. So that was a big step forward. So Ted Cruz can think what he wants, but to pressure an incoming chairman to ignore a petition that's been presented to the FCC, I think is untoward. I think it's out of bounds for him to do something like that. Not only is it out of bounds just for one person to put a hold on these nominations for such a long period of time, I guess we've all become too much used to that. That's not acceptable. But then to ask for a commitment from an incoming chairman on something like this, which in effect meant, I want you to ignore petitions that are pending at the FCC, is not a very good way to encourage a public independent commission to do its job. So yes, there's something we can do. It will need some support. It's a good grassroots issue, and I hope we can make some progress, and I hope we can get some help and everybody working to get that word out.
That's great. And so, I mean, I think that's a really detailed understanding of what could take place that could at least improve our accountability around this flood of ads. And it also shows, I think, what a high stakes issue it is. It's the kind of arcane regulatory point that doesn't always rise to, the front page of the New York Times or the editorial page of the New York Times, but obviously it demonstrates what an important issue that is. Now I want to return to the question of net neutrality. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but before we talk about it, we want to show a short piece of video that is itself a piece of a 30-minute video called "The Internet Must Go." We're going to watch it here in the room, and for those of you who are on the live stream, you have the timing of about 1:15 into the film, which is where we're going to be looking at the film here. And it's hopefully a more helpful way of demonstrating the point of net neutrality than some of our more wonkish kind of approaches to the question. And we have Gina Konstantinakos to thank for that, and she's in the room here with us, and we'll talk about it in a little while.
Take a look. Congratulations,
John Woolley.
we, the ISPs, have selected you for a very important mission in market research. ISP stands for Internet Service Provider, and that's what we do. Provide internet service, or EIS. Customers recognize us as Verizon, AT&T, Time Warner, and Comcast. Over the years, we've spent billions to build the pipes and towers that bring Americans the internet. Today, we face a crisis. There's just too much traffic. Fortunately, we have a solution. The internet, as it exists today, must go. Here's our proposition. Instead of everything going at the same speed, the way it does now, we will create a fast lane and a slow lane on the internet. Giant companies who can pay us more will be in the fast lane, where it will be easier for people to find them. Everyone else can take the slow road. We'll also create innovative new ways to charge internet users for the sites they want. What's stopping us? Well, you've probably heard a lot of hype about net neutrality and keeping the internet open. What do those buzzwords really mean? On an open internet, we're supposed to treat everything equally, whether it is profitable for us or not. This stands in the way of our freedom to make the money we deserve. But the public wants the internet to stay open. That's why we need you to get out there and talk to people. And help us figure out how to sell our new mission so we can eliminate net neutrality and reach our maximum profit potential. Good luck. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. What was your job?
Great. So, as I say, that's just a short scene from a not terribly long movie. I think it's about 30 minutes. And so really well worth your time to view the whole thing. But I wonder, it's a kind of a lighthearted approach to some very serious issues. And so, Bob and Michael, first I want to ask you both to, talk about what are the issues from a policy standpoint, what are the potential, the roles and decisions of the FCC, Bob and Michael, and then we'll come to the funder perspective and come back to the film in a minute.
Michael, why don't you go first and talk about your experience with the FCC and the issues you see it now?
Well, I would start out by saying this is not about telecom. It's not even about building broadband infrastructure. It's about democracy. It's about something fundamental to the well-being of this country. I like to use the term internet freedom or open internet. I don't think net neutrality tells us a lot, and I don't want anybody to be neutral about this issue or think that neutrality is what we are looking for. The core idea of internet freedom is that consumers should be free to access the content of their choice, to run the applications and attach whatever devices they want to the internet, and to enjoy the benefits of transparency and non-discrimination so that no one business can favor itself against competing internet service providers or internet companies. The second thing I want to mention before we get too far into this discussion is this is no longer just about internet service providers. This is no longer just about AT&T and Comcast and Verizon and those people who we pay to connect us to the information highways. Now it's also about the companies on that highway. And what I see happening on the internet are forces that are really damaging its opportunity creating potential, really eviscerating its chance to create opportunity for all Americans and bring this technology to everybody so that we can use it for so many different reasons. So we have to look at the world where you have a Google and you have Facebook and you have Amazon and you have eBay, and ask yourself, what about that small d democratic potential of this great internet? Wasn't this going to be the world where 1 million bloggers were on it and we were all exchanging information? A new town square of democracy paved with broadband bricks. That was the hope. And the hope was that there wouldn't be a few consolidated companies that were controlling the gateways and who keep consolidating. And it wasn't the hope that we would do this just so we could sell books or conduct auctions, but so we could enable that civic dialogue and make sure that we had a vibrant town square of democracy where people could interact with one another, and you didn't have to be a multi-million-dollar company or a billion-dollar company to do that. So I'd like to have us see this in the broadest possible context. This is about our whole future in this country. And if our media, our radio and our TV are going to, a lot of it migrate to the internet, doesn't that really become invested with the public interest? Isn't that important to all of us? But if you try to bring that discussion up, what do you hear? Oh, you're just trying to regulate the internet. You're one of those guys from Washington who just wants to regulate here, free enterprise, anti-American, and everything else. But in reality, all we're trying to do is make sure that the consumer And the citizen can control their online experience and have a vibrant online experience once they're on there. Okay, let me fast forward, because at the FCC, I witnessed all the decisions that were being made that got us into this mess, and I dissented a lot of the time, as some of you may know. But Bob, if you were going to get into all this,
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
tell me.
You're fine.
But the commission decided early on, along about 2002, shortly after I got there, that broadband and broadband generally, that wasn't telecommunications. It had nothing to do with, telephones, and had nothing to do with all the consumer protections that generations of advocates had provided in the telephone industry for privacy rights and reasonable and comparable prices and universal service and public safety and all of those other goods. No. That broadband's got nothing to do with that. This is an information technology. It's not communications. So they took that information technology, put it in a part of the bill that didn't really have any oomph behind it, and that's how we treated broadband. So since then, we've been deregulating the internet service providers. We haven't done anything much with regard to for the folks who are running the internet itself. I haven't even started up a dialogue about that. We're the only country. I once asked Yochai Benkler at the Berkman Center in Harvard, I said, did any other country that you know about ever go down this road of saying this isn't telecommunications? And he looked and called me back about a week later. He said, I can't find one. We're the only ones that did that. And in doing that, we really slowed down the deployment of broadband and the adoption of broadband, and just encouraged the forces of consolidation on the internet. So my take on it now is, let's look at the internet part of it as well as the internet service providers, and let's have a public dialogue on the future of that internet. We know there are fewer blogs starting up these days than there were 4 or 5 years ago. We know that Twitter has replaced a lot of the blogs. We know that there are huge gatekeeping companies with algorithms that are, for the most part, designed to facilitate business, but we don't know what other reasons there are for these algorithms. We know that most people never get beyond the first or second click of the internet, so where Google tells you to go, or one of those folks tells you to go, that's where we go. That's not really enabling the kind of broad-based, small d democratic discussion that we need to have if we're going to confront the challenges we face. So I see this as a huge problem. The internet freedom rules and network neutrality rules that the FCC passed were, in my book, very watered down. They didn't even apply like to wireless technology and other things of that nature. Verizon and AT&T and the big companies helped Chairman Janikowski to write those rules. But then, and it didn't surprise me a bit, they took them to court once they were passed. That's exactly what they did with the Telecommunications Act back in 1996. So it was just normal standard operating procedure for them. So this decision is before the circuit court in Washington right now, with a decision, I think, as was mentioned earlier, due sometime soon. No matter how that decision comes out, don't drop this issue, because that decision is only going to be directed at a small part of the problem. It'll talk about some palliative steps with regard to the internet service providers, but it's not really going to discipline them, and it's going to do nothing about these broader democratic issues having to do with how the internet is going to affect how you and I communicate, how we figure out how we're going to confront some of the difficult challenges that facing this country, how we're going to govern ourselves as a democracy. So it's a mightily important issue that's not going away, and I suspect by spring it'll be far and away the leading telecommunications issue, and I hope it's one of the leading small d democratic issues too for our country.
Well, I think there is clearly, widespread interest in everybody having access to the internet so that we can all equally experience the failure of healthcare.gov. Bob, tell us a little more.
Yeah, well, when President Obama was candidate, in 2008, he was talking about the healthcare system. And I think he actually said this also when he was President Obama in 2009. And he said if we were starting from scratch, obviously we would not have a private health insurance system. We would have a health system like they have in other rational countries, single payer, like in most democracies. And he was candid. He said, but politically, that's impossible here because these guys have too much political power, so we have to deal them in. And he acknowledged that at that time. And I think that's a good way to understand the companies that Mike Copps just described, AT&T, Verizon, Time Warner Cable, and Comcast. If you were devising an internet from scratch, you would never say, hey, let's give 4 big companies a cartel control over internet access, let them basically own the regulators and do whatever they want to maximize their profits. That would be absurd. And that's basically what we've done in the United States. To put this in context, in 1996, when the Telecommunications Act was passed, we had roughly 16 to 20 major telecommunication companies that did local phone service, long distance, satellite TV, and cable television. Today we have a cartel really of 3 companies that covers pretty much all that, and then there's 3 or 4 companies outside that that take their cues from the top 3. The top 3 being Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast. And I call them a cartel, not in a pejorative manner, because I think Harold Feld, the public knowledge, he's still a public knowledge researcher, put it well that these firms don't even operate like an oligopoly, like the auto industry. They literally divide up markets like a cartel. And as a result, we've seen in America, because of the power of this cartel, since in 2000, we ranked in the top 3 of every measure of internet speed, access, cost. We were in front of the world. The internet was invented here. We were the internet. Today, depending on which measure you look at, we've fallen off to 15, 20, 25, 30, and we're falling. We're going down. Every time a new survey comes out, we're falling, because the cartel has no incentive to invest, and we've got an antiquated network, and they have tremendous incentive to raise prices as high as possible. They can get away with it. That's what happens. That's that market power they have. And they get, as a result, what are called rents by economists, undeserved profits. Now, these are companies that wouldn't know a free market if it kicked them in the butt. All those companies were created by government monopoly licenses. Their comparative advantage in the quote-unquote marketplace is that they have the best lobbyists in the world. As Craig, not to embarrass you, said to me, Craig Aaron, we were talking about this when I was working to do some research about a year ago. He said the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats on these issues is whether AT&T overtly or covertly writes the rules. But they're going to be writing the rules we get depending on who's in power. That's how much they control the board on all these issues. And combined with Comcast and Verizon, that's what we're looking at. And net neutrality actually is like the issue of community broadband, which is trying to allow communities to set up their own independent broadband networks. They're both efforts to deal with the power of the cartel somehow, because rationally the cartel would like to be able to get rid of net neutrality because their profits go through the roof at that point. They can start toll booths. They can turn the internet into cable television or satellite TV in effect. And so if they can get away with it, it makes perfect sense for them and for their investors. But the core problems is what we should really not take our eye off. Even though it might not be politically challengeable inside the Beltline, it's this cartel with this immense power commanding these rents that are completely unjustified. There's the reason we have to have a debate about net neutrality, the reason we have to have a debate about community broadband, because we were given no other choice. And I think what that video you saw did very well is it showed the internet, the theory of the internet, and the way it was designed by the engineers and the people who designed it originally, was that the power was on the outside. Everyone was equal at the outside. You controlled your fate. Where you went, what people knew about you, you had the control. And the concern with net neutrality is that suddenly someone inside determines whether you can get in and what you can see. And that's why net neutrality is a principle that's so important. And then this is where Mike and I are in strong agreement. I think if you understand that principle, there's a lot of other stuff going on online that should concern us just as much. And this gets ultimately to the issue that free press now is devoting so much energy toward, which Vince alluded to at the beginning, surveillance of people. Because what you have now taking place on the internet outside of the cartel, the internet service providers, is that we've seen the growth of really monopoly all over the internet. It's dominated by 7, 8, 10 companies, which are effectively monopolies in economics terms. The internet has spawned very little competition, ironically. You look at the dominant companies, Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, eBay, Facebook. All of them have market share in core areas that economists would consider monopoly market share. Some of them have market shares greater than what John D. Rockefeller had with Standard Oil in the late 19th century, his peak. And these are super powerhouses, and they also have turned the internet on its head in crucial ways, because what they've learned is, especially Microsoft and Google, but all of them really, what they've learned is that the value of the internet, when you give a product for free, and this is like as a user of the internet, if you get something for free on the internet, you're not the customer, you're the product. Because what they get from you is they collect every bit of data they know about you. And now a year ago, that was a shocking statement. 6 months ago, now we all get it. Yes, everything you do online, commercial interests have collected, and they're using it so they can manipulate you. And you're getting a different internet than other people as a result. So that whole principle that you control your experience of the internet because you're on the outside, and you can let people see what you want to see. You see whatever you want to see, no one controls that. Well, in this new world of sort of monopoly surveillance, if I go to ESPN, I'm going to get a different page than Craig because I root for a different team. If you go to a website, you're going to be getting different things aimed at you because what they think advertisers want you to get. You don't control it anymore. And it's really related to the principle of network neutrality. The power of control has been taken out of the hands of the end user, put in the hands of the people who control the policy debates in Washington. And that's why, to echo what Mike said, we're talking about fundamental policy issues here. Not, oh, if we lose net neutrality, okay, I have to pay a few bucks more a month. No, we're talking about the whole architecture of the internet's evolved away from what it meant to be to something that serves the interests of a very small number of large commercial interests. And let's see, I think that's enough.
That's a good start. Well, I think we'll come back to the issue of surveillance. Obviously, it's on the front page every day. Today, I think we saw an interesting headline with AT&T's payments for surveillance. I saw an acerbic tweet from Evgeny Morozov today. Are there any other kinds? Who pointed out that the Russians and the Chinese wouldn't understand this free market where you actually have to pay the companies to surveil your people, which is different. That's the free market at work, I think. But Helen, let's talk about the role of the funder, and particularly where I think you've given a lot of thought, where funders have a particular lens on health issues or the environment or what have you. Help us understand why it's relevant for all funders and any funders.
Well, this is an area that cuts across all issues. You're talking about communication rights, and as people move online, human rights need to move online, and people need to be able to access adequate education, access adequate health care, be able to organize, be able to assemble. It hits many different points of the U.S. Declaration of Human Rights. Preserving the internet is core, actually, to preserving human rights, or preserving the open internet is core. And one of the things that I think is critically important in this issue and working on this issue is that we all have to stay outside of our silos and get outside of our silos. We need to lift our heads up and look out. And even for those, and particularly now, funding on this issue is always complicated, right? One needs to keep a foot in the world of the legacy issues, I'll call them, that we've just been talking about, as well as looking 5 years out and trying to figure out where do we need to position ourselves to make sure that we're on top of, or even perhaps ahead of, some of the things like surveillance and corporate data mining and the selling of people's preferences in real time and live time on the internet, and some of the other things that get a little bit more complicated. As an example of this, we talked about the architecture of the internet here, and it used to be that the policy people would be here and the technologists would be here, and you might occasionally get some cross-pollination in meetings, but there was a real need to bring technologists and policymakers together and weave them together as a rope, because we see that there are sometimes technological and platform solutions to these policy issues, or they might work temporarily that way, and then as we get a policy win, and then the technologists also need to be informed about policy making, because it really isn't true that you can code around everything. And fortunately, the conversation has evolved, beyond that at this point. So I think how you remain responsive and relevant as these issues are changing and shifting under our feet every day is a key issue. And one of the ways that has been successful for us is to really work together. There are a number of our funding partners in this room, and certainly a number of our grantee partners in this room, and I think we're really all better together. This is a difficult space, and it's also, though, a really exciting and vibrant and amazing space, and there are extraordinary groups working in it. It's there's opportunities to work with many constituencies to expand the base far beyond what we've been talking about now, for those of you who can do C4 funding as well as C3 funding, combining C4, C3 and rapid response is a way to really begin to win some of these battles, mixing the coalitions, the intentional weaving together of different pockets and groups of people so that we can win. And we also, I just want to say, we need to be in this for the long haul. We're talking about the petition that Andy Schwartzman, who is now going to be at Georgetown University, which is very exciting, that we'll still have him as a vibrant member of the field. We are looking at, sorry, I lost my, the petition on the disclosure. So that went in 2011. I think it's helpful I wasn't going to talk about the prison phone win, but we just had a really fantastic win, a human rights win, in terms of really beginning to cut back and eliminate phone fraud, for people who are incarcerated and their families. That win took 10 years. That petition was filed 10 years ago. So we really need to be in this for the long haul. We also need to look to some very innovative strategies, and Michael Connor's here, which is really wonderful, and he's really taken the lead on developing shareholder activism strategies that have had extraordinary success. We've now had, the FEC has finally said that the net neutrality has risen to the level where it's a social justice issue that can be taken to shareholders. That took how many years? 4 years. And now Michael's working on privacy. So like recently he was able to get Apple, just through the threat of a shareholder petition, to begin to establish at the governance level a privacy committee, which now means that that's risen to the level of fiduciary responsibility, which, then again, changes how we can pressure the companies and work with the companies. So part of what I'm trying to say from the funding perspective is you really have to take the broad view, and you have to realize that this is a long distance run and not a sprint. And you need to be really willing to take risks, starting something like Open Technology Institute with $25,000 and it's now a $5 million organization. You take those risks, and sometimes you fail, but it really is, we are better together.
So let me just press you a little bit on this point, because I read an article that you wrote that said a little bit more about this. So I'll just remind you that although we should think beyond our silos at times, we also can recognize that these policies affect our silos.
Yes.
And so if you are a healthcare funder in particular, there's the information technology situation around healthcare, obviously healthcare.gov notwithstanding, is very significant. And so maybe if you could just sharpen that particular point.
So we're actually working on a project around equity and competition in the healthcare situation in relationship to technology. But, as we think about just even, I know right now there's a lot of, anxiousness around, as Vince joked about, the platform that's coming out so that people can actually have affordable health insurance in this country for the first time. But there are deeper issues than that. So if you are, for example, a stroke victim, and you're living in a rural area, you have a 15-minute window to know whether or not you are going to get the medication that's going to prevent you from being paralyzed or unable to speak or unable to walk. You're living in a rural area and there is no fat pipe, euphemistically, enough bandwidth to get your scans to a health center where there's a specialist who can tell you which medication your doctor should give you. You're done, right? So just, and aging in place, right? We have looking around this room, quite a few aging boomers are here. Many people are committed to and want to age in place. There are skyrocketing health costs in terms of what's going to happen in long-term care facilities. Aging in place is actually part of that solution. But in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to have a nurse's aide on Skype watching you cook a meal and telling you, maybe you should cook that chicken a little bit longer so that you don't die from that, and then sitting there and having a conversation with you while you eat your meal. So as an elderly person, you actually eat. It's to that level, in addition to things like being able to monitor heart rates, blood pressure, et cetera, and, deliver the kind of care.
Great. Yes.
Can I add just a little bit to her Ellen's very eloquent statement on the intersection of public policy generally and the health of the media ecosystem. As I go around the country, and some of you have heard me tell this story before, I will often ask people, especially if it's a group of young people, what do you think is the greatest issue facing our country right now? And as I go around that room, I'll get, well, it's jobs, or it's 50 million uninsured health, or it's the problems with our educational system, it's climate degradation, it's energy independence, creating equal opportunity. The list goes on and on. And I say, well, those are all important issues, but none of them are going to be resolved until we have a media ecosystem and a journalism and an internet that really tees them up to the attention of the American people. And goodness knows, I think our country now faces problems as serious as any since probably the 1930s. And there's no get out of jail free card like in Monopoly for the United States of America regarding the hole that it is in right now. We have really tough decisions to make. And those tough decisions depend mightily on the vitality and the vibrancy of our democratic dialogue and our civic dialogue. And I think I had an opportunity to talk to the Council on Foundations, and some of you were there last spring. And I made the same point. There's so many important issues that folks in this room and others are taking on health, environment, energy, and all these things. But I don't think any of them have a chance of going very far until the media steps up and explains these issues and covers the beat and gives them the attention they deserve, so that at least we can test that theory of democracy and see if an informed people really are capable of making good decisions for the future of their country. And we have dumbed down our civic dialogue. I forget who coined that term originally. There's no question in my mind. We've got all this glitzy infotainment masquerading as news. We have shouted opinion substituting for fact, and it's in pretty dire straits. So all of these issues are dependent, and that's why I always say, well, that's fine. You can have your number one issue, but you ought to put this media thing right up there next to it, because it's that important and it's that integral to the other problems that we're searching for solutions.
Yes. True, but if we can call on the, one of the classics of the madman age of commercialism, if you can't beat them, join them, I think. So we're going to talk a little bit about clever ways of talking about issues which can sometimes cause the eyes to glaze over. I mean, as serious as they are and as deep as you have to get to really talk about these issues. And also, I would recognize from the Twitter stream that we have some differences of opinion on particular points, and I want to come to those. Jeff, I caught one of yours in particular. But we have seen a short video here, and I think Gina has gotten to crystallize those points in a way with her video that has achieved something that some of us haven't with many more words. So Gina Konstantinakos, am I pronouncing your name anywhere near close? Could you tell us a little bit about doing the video, what you were trying to accomplish, and what you've been able to accomplish with the reach of your video?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for inviting me to be here today. I was working in TV in 2010 and have been working in TV for 10 years. And as everyone has been bringing up, that was the time when Citizens United happened. The NBC Comcast merger also happened around that same period of time. And I remember feeling just that in many ways it was a very grim moment, with fewer and fewer companies taking over more and more of our media and our democracy. And what was making me feel really hopeful during that period was everything that was going on online. And then when I learned that, the openness of the internet is not actually solidly protected, I was really alarmed by that realization. And I wondered, why isn't everyone that I know also really alarmed and thinking about this? And I remember having the experience over and over again and talking to friends of mine of, you get a couple of sentences, even really, you get to the third syllable of net neutrality, and people are looking around, and, and so I just remember feeling like, oh my God, there has to be, a way to start this conversation and keep people awake, and so this film, it tells the story of a guy named John Woolley, and he is a misguided market researcher. He starts out sort of believing this corporate memo, and then over the course of his journey, he learns that in fact, the internet is not a finite resource. These companies have no competition. It also branches into this realm of community broadband, where he learns that there are 19 states across the country where there are barriers that are erected to people building their own broadband. So he really learns, that this is, as you were describing it, a cartel. Thanks to a lot of the help from a lot of people in this room, Press and Helen and Lori and others who really supported this process for a long time. We were able to, in advance of the launch, we decided to launch the film on September 9th to sync up with the oral arguments between Verizon and the FCC. And leading up to that day, we had, a handful of preview screenings with different people who, and organizations who have a vested interest in the internet remaining open. And everybody kind of got together on the 9th, the day of launch, and helped to blast it out. And so it's been a little under 2 months since we launched. It's been viewed over 230,000 times. And there's a really interesting conversation that's been percolating on Twitter and on the Facebook page from people kind of all over who don't identify as policy wonks or interested necessarily in technology. And it's been it's sort of it's an interesting example of like if we had needed an ISP's permission to publish this film, like clearly it would never have reached the number of people that it has. So. So that's the basic summary. I hope you guys will. This memo is a sort of a clear definition, or what we try to have be a definition of net neutrality. But the film overall is an attempt to sort of illustrate the stakes.
Yeah, no, it's great. And there's, I think, some particularly touching scenes in, I think, North Carolina, where people have to drive to a high spot on the edge of town to do their homework, because they don't have access to internet in their homes, and it's kind of ridiculous and sad at the same time. Worth watching. Now, there's another piece. Yep. Yep, please.
Sure, it's called The Internet Must Go. Sure.
Yeah, and it's viewable right there.
.com. Yeah.
Great. Super. So there's we have another piece of media that I think illustrates some of this too. Literally illustrates some of it because it's an illustrated kind of a comic treatment of these issues, and its title is
Big Deal, Big Money.
Big Deal, Big Money, and it was done in conjunction with Symbolia, which is a great new journalism organization. And Todd O'Boyle with Common Cause is going to tell us a little bit about that. Here in the room, we're looking at it on the screen, and I think you have the link at home on the live stream if you look at the links that Philanthropy New York has provided. So just give us a quick scan of what's in here and how and why you did it this way.
Sure. Well, as we've mentioned, these are technically complex issues, and I get excited about talking about Title I versus Title II of the Telecommunications Act. But I understand that for regular, normal people, that what matters is how does this impact their lives and what's really at stake. And so we partnered with Symbolia, as Vince suggested. Erin Polgren is the editor at Symbolia. She also works in the funding community through Vocal, so she wears many hats, and she's paired us with an artist who said, let's find a way to take some of the substantive policy issues at stake. If you scroll down, we sort of tell the story a little bit, and you see a young woman on her tablet, and she's surfing the internet and tweeting or listening to music. And then suddenly it stops working. And the question is, well, what's wrong? What's happened? And, well, we're in a world without net neutrality. Suddenly we find that the internet is cableized, to use the expression, that some websites, some services, some applications are denied, are blocked, are discriminated against, absent paying tolls or fees or whatever. But more than that, it's anti-democracy is the point we try to make, that in an age when voters inform themselves online, when activists organize themselves online, having a functional internet is crucial to having a functional democracy, as everyone on this panel has said in some words or another. So we try to tell the history of the net neutrality case, how it's wended its way through the courts. We mentioned the Verizon case. We mentioned the rules that were written in the Open Internet Order in 2010, and now Verizon's multi-million-dollar campaign that they're spending really all over town in Washington, and they've shown that there's no trick they won't resort to get their way to censor the internet. And so one thing that we did with this was we didn't want to just explain, we wanted to give people a way to take action. So there's a petition. This proved to be very popular online. We were the front page of Reddit for several hours a few Wednesdays ago. which was really exciting for us in terms of impact because it allowed us to talk to a demographic that doesn't hear so much about Common Cause, or maybe has heard of net neutrality in the abstract, but doesn't know why it really matters to the internet that they depend on every day. Had a tremendous spike in our web traffic, 220,000 page views, an increase of 300% relative to the week before. 93% of our traffic that week was new visitors. 500% increase in our Twitter engagement, and another 1,300% increase in our Facebook engagement after this got picked up by Reddit, Ongoing, and a couple other influential tech sites. So we were very excited about that. We were able to, and we'll be looking for other neat ways to tell the story of. As you see at the bottom, we referenced the Goodbye Open Internet white paper. I have copies of that report that we wrote, but we thought, let's take that report we wrote on Verizon's money in politics, and let's actually activate it, and let's illustrate it. And this is what happened.
So I want to point out that, in addition to scrolling and just viewing the panels, the images, there are many clickable links under each of these images too. So, you see something intriguing in the image and you see where it's clickable, that takes you to a report or a petition or something. So it's a very dynamic way of presenting information, dynamic visually and also in terms of pathways to action. So thank you. Yeah, please.
You could see how effective this would be on something like the Section 317 money in politics thing I was talking about before. So we want to do more. Things.
Absolutely, and I think it's a great lesson for any issue that you might have as a funder or a nonprofit. Think about a different way of delivering your information beyond the sort of white paper approach. So I want to open up to some questions. We have some more issues that we could go back and forth up here. I want to get the ball rolling by talking a little bit about something you touched on there, Todd, the sort of the role of corporate accountability. And I wonder if we could pass a mic over to Mike Connor. This is where we know what you know and are going to draw it from you, whether you like it or not.
I've done my homework. I'm a little
but
nervous.
I think that there's, there are a couple of key issues that that funders need to be aware of, because there are leading funders like Nathan Cummings Foundation and others who have recognized that yes, we have the power of our 5%, but we also have the power of our 95% of assets we hold, which may be then used to influence corporate activities through stock shareholder activities.
Right. I think traditionally in the funding world, you all know more about it than I do, there has been this kind of a split between your corpus and the small amount that you're allowed to fund programs with. And that remains a problem. Very few foundations are using their assets that way. I was just at a conference in Colorado, this SRI conference, Socially Responsible Investing Conference, and that very subject was discussed at length. And the term often used these days is impact investing. How do you use your funding to create impact? And if you're only using 5% of what you have, you're really missing the boat. Now, I'm sure that there are a lot of complications there in how to do that, but it's certainly one of the things we try to do at Open Mic, and it really opens up a whole new door. And we're just another level, or another PowerPoint, really, in addition to what Free Press and Public Knowledge and other groups do. But what it does is it opens up another discussion, whereas if you're talking about Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, Time Warner, they isolate all these issues in Washington, and they have all their lobbyists in Washington, and the head of lobbying, senior vice president of lobbying, whether it be Jim Ciccone or somebody like that, takes care of all those problems. What we're trying to do is have another person walk into the CEO, and that's the executive vice president of investor relations, who says, I'm getting calls from Fidelity, I'm getting calls from Vanguard, and they want to know why this issue is on the ballot and why a very prestigious proxy advisory firm is recommending it, whether it be net neutrality or privacy. And it opens up a whole other level of discussion for senior management and for the board. We're not there yet. We have a long way to go. But that's the concept. And so that the more pressure we can bring and the more foundations can bring in terms of support, the better off we are.
Great. I want to ask Ben Shute from Rockefeller Brothers Fund to speak to a similar issue of corporate accountability when it comes to the initial topic that we discussed here, which is political advertising.
Sure. Is this on?
Yeah, it is
Oh,
on, but
oh,
it's
okay.
not.
It's
It's
not
for
on for here, it's for
the
there.
people.
Right, okay. I haven't visited the NSA recently, so I'm not quite sure.
We're just making it easier for them.
Right.
We're giving you a straight line.
I don't know why I pay for the archiving my stuff in the cloud when it's being done for me,
Exactly.
you know, with my tax money. So, in fact, I don't know why they're bringing Google in to help with the Affordable Care website. Why aren't they getting the NSA experts in there to fix it? Well, they're busy. Okay. Sorry, I'm digressing. Yeah. One of the big issues around the results of Citizens United, of course, is that corporations are now free to spend Treasury money for political purposes in ways that they weren't before. And as we talked earlier about the dark money, they managed to figure out ways to do that where they can't be traced. Target learned early on when they funded a politician they thought was going to be business friendly, and he turned out to be very anti-gay rights, and they suffered that. But it is possible to bring to corporations shareholder resolutions, and it is possible for foundations that have significant holdings in particular corporations to sit down with those corporations and say either disclose your political spending, or if you don't disclose it, don't do it, or put it under the control of your board. And there have been a number of shareholder resolutions. There are a number of organizations that are working on this. Bruce Freed at the Center for Political Accountability, in conjunction with the Zicklin Center, now publishes the Zicklin Index, which ranks corporations on their political transparency, and that's a kind of pressure that foundations and consumers can put onto their corporations to try to disclose what they're not legally required to disclose. But the use of that money is very interesting. We just had a ballot initiative in the state of Washington on labeling genetically modified foods. 2 or 3 weeks before the election, the polls were showing 2-to-1 in favor of that initiative. It lost. It lost because at the last minute, the Monsanto and the grocery manufacturers and Coca-Cola and everybody came in with huge amounts of money. There's a wonderful graphic on the MapLight website which shows how much money came in and where it came from. And again, a lot of the companies that we love to patronize as we clog our arteries didn't fund it directly. They funded it through the grocery manufacturers. I assume they're a C6 and don't have to disclose their donors. So this is a real problem in terms of all kinds of political spending, but on the corporate side, this same approach of shareholder activism has real promise and is making some progress.
Great. So I want to open up, and I want to just go back because I saw that Jeff Jarvis indicated from his tweet. I disagree with Free Press's McChesney that targeting is a bad thing in media. Relevance beats mass. We tolerate no disagreement, so you'll have to leave now. Tell us more. You want to elaborate? And there's a yeah, sure. We'll get you a mic here. No, you don't today either, but for those people.
And tweets are too short to make clear that I agreed with most everything Bob did say.
Yeah.
But I also think that I'm pushing media companies to get smarter about having relationships and instead of just putting out one-size-fits-all content to people and giving relevance. So I would want the ESPN page that has the Jets instead of the Giants or the Patriots, you know. God forbid. And so I think that the part of what we want to do here is not just focus on the bad companies, but focus on the word you used, Mr. Copps, of an ecosystem. Now, Free Press is helping me right now complain to the FCC about Verizon because Verizon refuses to connect my Google Nexus 7 to its supposedly open network, a form of net neutrality. So Google and Verizon did a devil's deal over net neutrality. So I'm happy to, go with my pitchfork and torch to the large companies as well. But I think there's a positive message to be done here, which is to build, with this opportunity Mr. Kopp's talked about, we have this opportunity for the first time that everyone has a Gutenberg press, everyone has the chance to build media anew. You as funders can help greatly. My friend Chris Daggett and I in New Jersey are working on New Jersey's ecosystem, can help build infrastructure, technology, network support, training, those kinds of things to enable new players with new voices to use the internet as we hoped it would be used to give voice to new communities, cover new communities, and so on. So I think that there's also a positive message to be made here. Besides, it's a little hard, I think, sometimes to raise money to say because companies are bad or can be bad, which I think is a better way to say it. I also wrote a book called What Would Google Do? I generally like a lot of what Google does. So, I see both sides of that. But I also think that if we go to the positive end of this, let's build what's new here, let's support what's new here, figure out how to make what's new sustainable and successful. That, especially in a room like this with funders, I think is a very important message.
I think that's a great message, and in a way, it elaborates on the perspective that Michael and Ben have just offered, which is you want to encourage companies to do what's in the public interest, but also see their own corporate interests in the larger public interest as well. Michael?
If I can just jump in, there's a tendency to think that a lot of what we're talking about is anti-corporate and pro-regulation. One of the major interveners in the FCC Verizon case is venture capitalists, who are the people responsible for Google and Yahoo and all the rest, and they see net neutrality as very critical to this whole issue. So it's not a pro or anti-business kind of an argument.
Can I just elaborate a little bit on that? I think you can engage in this issue without seeing it as a world of good guys versus bad guys, although I think there are companies out there whose motivations I suspect a lot. But the dynamic of free enterprise, which we chose many years ago to put media under, the dynamic of free enterprise is build toward market control, build toward gatekeeping control. That's not going to change, and we're not about to change that. But what the companies are seeking now is monopoly status without any public oversight, and that is new, and we have never let that happen before. Even in the days of Ma Bell and all that, there was some regulation. Now Verizon, as it sues the FCC on its milquetoast FCC rules, is saying, we don't want any regulation. We don't want any public oversight whatsoever. We have, we're persons. We have all of these rights. We have First Amendment right to not be regulated. I forget. It's just a ridiculous kind of argument. So it comes back to the question less of who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. Are we going to keep in place some semblance of public oversight that I think this country decided in the progressive era and beyond was necessary in a free enterprise state in order to protect the public interest? And that's what's an issue as much as anything else before the courts right now on the network neutrality case.
I'd add on to that it's really not about good, bad guy corporations. I assume that the management of firms are doing what they're supposed to do. They're trying to achieve shareholder value. And if there are bad guys, in my view, and I think the view that of the media reform movement, it's policymakers who aren't enforcing the law, that are allowing bad things to happen. They're the ones who are accountable to us directly. They're the public servants in the mix, and they're the ones who, when they don't do their job, they are bad guys. And that's who we call out as the bad guys. Look, I understand if I'm a shareholder in AT&T, yeah, I hate net neutrality. I'll be honest. AT&T stocks will be worth a lot more if you get rid of net neutrality, probably. But our challenge is to get the law enforced so that's not something they have an option of doing. That's where the bad guys are. They're the public sector, the ones who are supposed to serve us but aren't.
Sarah Stranhan.
Well, on the question of corporate power and good guys and bad guys, I don't think we have to accuse corporations of being bad guys to bear witness to the fact that the Citizens United ruling has been brought up at least 7 times in this conversation, and that ruling is what gave the corporate sector First Amendment rights, which allow them to assert a monopoly without public regulation. And therefore, we can see those are bad laws. Mm-hmm. And those laws create, law-abiding corporations are now allowed to do things that are anti-democratic and not in the public interest, and so we need to correct those laws. And furthermore, I guess I just have a question for Bob. I think these remedies are very exciting, the Section 317, very creative and very exciting, but I'd like to know what is it that we want? Not what is it that's possible, not what is it that we can eke out in the absence of congressional power to get the disclosure rules that we deserve, but what is it that we want to do about a cartel for companies controlling the internet? What is our long-term vision and our long-term goal?
Great question. And first of all, I've got to say, this is the first time I've seen Sarah Stranahan in 35 years. And I recognized you. We went to college together at Evergreen in Olympia.
That's great.
And I recognized you. The second thing I'll say is that John Nichols and I have a piece in today's Nation that just came out today on this very issue. And it's to congratulate or commemorate Free Press's 10th anniversary. So it's a short article we wrote at the front of the magazine. And our argument is that we need to, the problem that this discussion we've had pretty much today, most discussions like this, if not all, is they get into sort of the weeds of issues in such a way that when you get out beyond Manhattan or the Beltway to Illinois or Wisconsin where I live, they sort of like your net neutrality, people glaze over. And the problem is when we get debating what seem like narrow things to people, it doesn't make it really substantively affect their life. Okay, so we do have disclosure. We're still going to be bombarded in negative ads. That's not going to change. We'll get to know who's paying for them. And so, we need bold things that will capture people's imagination. Like, how about no political ads? They're outlawed in Germany. That's why we spend 34 times more than them. They're outlawed in Norway. They get 80% voter turnout in Norway. We had 80% voter turnout here. They closed down every business for a month to celebrate. I mean, why don't we think broadly? Why do we subject our political system to these ads that are considered the equivalent of germ warfare in other democracies? Those are the sort of things people, when you say that in Kankakee, people start jumping up and down. Yeah, now you're talking. I can stick my teeth into that. When we talk about the cartel, why do we say, why do we even have this cartel? Why don't we have a single payer? Why don't we just cash them out, give them money for their investment, and just make free broadband for everyone and create a system and make it like the post office, something like that. I mean, that's the sort of broad thinking. Even if you don't get there, it draws people in and say, okay, now I can see a real difference if I organize. This will qualitatively improve the quality of my life dramatically. I like that. I'm going to do something. I'm really going to get active.
I think that's a great way of raising our sights. I think the other flip side of this discussion is not just the constant struggle for things we can't obtain, but also there have been some notable successes. Mm-hmm. And Helen, in particular, I want to maybe invite you to talk about Low Power FM and maybe the Stop SOPA PIPA as two different types of debates, which I think we're on the right side of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Before I do that, though,
Yeah,
I just
please.
want to build on Bob's point and recommend Susan Crawford's book, Captive Audience, in terms of what we do about that cartel, and also just to give you a little bit more evidence of what I will call collusion among the companies to fix prices in this country and control the flow of information, and which also affects journalism and all the things that we care about. So I'm going to begin with SOPA PIPA just because I think it builds off of some of the themes that Gina brought up and that Todd did of, how you take an arcane policy issue and make it relevant. So, copyright policy is perhaps the thing, I guess spectrum policy actually makes people's eyes glaze over faster than copyright policy, but copyright policy is a close second, So when we were facing a really draconian bill that would literally break the internet in the way it was written initially, we looked around and really saw a gap in terms of creative people who could make this issue an everyday kitchen table issue. So I had been familiar with the team that had previously been called Downhill Battle because they had done a phenomenal job BitTorrenting a movie called Eyes on the Prize, which is a key legacy film in terms of documenting this country's civil rights history that was no longer able to be shown because the rights couldn't be cleared on historical photographs. And so they did this sort of civil disobedience action where they set up a system where people could hold house parties and, actually watch the film through downloading it through BitTorrent. So I knew of their creative potential, and I thought, you know what? We've got to get them involved in this. They're the people who will be able to make this relevant. So they took Justin Bieber, who, you know, for whatever we think of Justin Bieber's music, really made his career by singing covers in his mother's living room, which, you know, was illegal, you know. So they built a website with Justin Bieber in jail. They had, you know, decal tears that they gave away. They had, him crying in the jail cell, and, you know, and there was certainly method to how he found out, but we made sure that he found out, and, you know, he sent a cease and desist order to the website at the same time that he went on the radio station and said, I think that senator who brought this up and put this on the floor should be put in jail. I'm not the one that should be put in jail. I don't want to go to jail. And he was fantastic. So suddenly, overnight, this arcane, crazily difficult technical policy issue, people were coming home from college and asking me at Thanksgiving, you know, there's this issue you want to work on. It has to do with putting artists in jail, and there's, and then when we shut down the internet, when we did the internet strike, which Fight for the Future was integrally involved in, and for me, I come out of the arts. For me, this mirrored Day Without Art, which was something we started in the 90s to really raise the visibility of AIDS. And at the same time, we also did the Red Ribbon Project, which of course now has spawned every color ribbon in the universe. They were, as I was sitting there at midnight in my bed watching my phone, because I knew that the internet was going to go down at midnight, I saw this tweet that said, WTF, Wikipedia down, history due, what's hashtag SOPA. And as soon as I saw that tweet, I knew we had won. So fast forward, we did defeat those bills, but of course there are other ways, that this kind of draconian policies being reintroduced, through enforcement, through agency work, through little things that are being added on. But things have shifted somewhat on the Hill. For instance, when Feinstein dropped her bill recently, that was kind of status quo on the NSA, we worked with Demand Progress to issue a statement immediately and got a call within 20 minutes from Harry Reid's office saying, what would the internet settle for? And, and then we also got, unfortunately it has raised its ugly head again, so we're back fighting that. As always with these battles, they're iterative. And so I think this issue of really bringing issues to the mainstream and telling them in creative ways that make them relevant for people, it's the only way we're going to win, and in addition to expanding the base, which is also so critically important.
So let me just fill in a couple things, because I think we can easily get into a description of events without necessarily everyone in the room knowing what SOPA and PIPA are. Just a quick definition of what SOPA would have done.
So SOPA was the Stop Online Piracy Act. And, coming from the creative community, I will be the first one to say that I believe in rights for intellectual property. This is not a question. The question is, how balanced is it, and what are the measures by which we are able to enforce that? This particular bill had language in it that would mean that entire internet domains, right? So something like WordPress, right, which is the functional engine that many organizations' websites are on, particularly in the nonprofit arena. If there were a copyright violation, that entire platform could be taken down without any due process. This was the other problem with the law. There was no due process. There was no warning. It was just like gone, seized, and you'd get this big Homeland Security sticker, to let you know that the site was down. There's a lot more to that law.
That's fine. I think just people need to know what it was that was being stopped. And I think what was particularly interesting about that moment was suddenly a thing that no one was paying any attention to, by virtue of, I think, the vanguard leadership of Fight for the Future. And we have their webpage too. I think we might be able to throw that up. And again, on the live stream, you have a link to Fight for the Future, which is an amazing group. Really is a small group of creative people who've crafted very powerful messages around complex things. But what they were able to do through that vanguard leadership, the small group was able to illuminate the issue for the much larger players like Wikipedia, Google, etc. And then in a very short cycle, the small players and the large players together informed their users, there's a sizable number of users of Wikipedia, what would happen if we were confronted with the implications of this law. And going dark, over a 24-hour period, the politics of that issue flipped. Just out of the, I mean, I think people were stunned by the nature of that shift. So I think it's a really interesting case of how, when people see their interest, the broad public interest of an open internet, conveying that in a very powerful way.
Can I just have a quick PSA? We would also really like to have company funding this group. We're one of their only funders, so
Is there one of those that is a short click that you would suggest just for fun here?
You could do, well, let's see, let's do Internet Defense League.
Internet Defense League.
Okay, so this is the CAT signal. So this was an organizing tool that they had, and you know, whether the CAT signal was the right symbol or not, whatever, but the idea was to make sure, as they say, that the internet never loses, ever, right? So that this constituency, which is really, I mean, we really work with them to really target internet users, right? That's the constituency we're targeting with these. You know, would have this signal that could be, in a sense, and they made little flashlights and, you know, all kinds of little things. They did films, they did projections on buildings, you know, and launched this league that now has, you know, platforms in other countries as well, where they're, I mean, that's the other point, right?
Okay.
This is not just a battle within the U.S.
Great. And I guess the implication is cats, being the cutest things on the internet,
Yes,
have a right
exactly.
to exist there too.
Well,
Okay, great. So anyway, I just invite you all to explore that. They've got some really clever and powerful messages on that.
And
on
just
that
wait,
site.
we're working on some cool campaigns.
Okay, and then maybe a word or two. I mean, the one bright spot, I think, of the government shutdown is you all had an extra 2 weeks to fill out your application for a low-power FM radio signal. So I hope you're all back home, you know, filling out those forms soon. Tell us a little bit about
mean, we
LPFM,
say
because
that-
that's another great victory,
Yeah, I
too.
mean, we say that, but she says, but we really do mean it. If you have grantees who could benefit by having a community radio station. And Loris Taylor is in the room, who is the director of Native Public Media, a premier organization. And if anyone has any questions about radio, there she is. But this particular win was, again, 10 years, took 10 years. We had some unlikely foes, like, you know, NPR. We weren't expecting that. We expected the National Association of Broadcasters to be against us, but not NPR. So we had almost, this is an issue that the Clinton administration, and this is a quote, I won't attribute it, but LPFM is low-hanging fruit that will shut up the public interest community. So that was supposed to be an easy, quick win, you know, that was going to, quote unquote, shut up the public interest community. Took 10 years, you know, thanks to some players like NPR and the National Association of Broadcasters. And then it took a very complicated dance on the Hill to like be able to kind of discredit. We had to have engineers involved. We needed to discredit the rumor that LPFM would create a lot of interference with other stations. We needed to have grassroots communities come and say, our information needs are not being met. You know, we have, you know, everybody's pulled out of local news coverage. You know, how are we going to have community-based local news coverage? How are we going to convey these things to our community that's so critically important? So we had them coming to the Hill and telling stories and so on and so forth. And then here's where C4 money comes around, right? So it's like toward the end, it was really important for us to make a rapid response grant to the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and have Wade Henderson go in and just throw some people around the room, right? He's a consummate lobbyist. He has deep ways to work that magic, and we got the bill through. So then what happens, fast forward, you have to do the work with the FCC, right, to make sure that the rules of awarding these licenses. And Loris, through her incredible work in getting the Office of Native American Affairs and Policy at the FCC, and also worked to get, for instance, a tribal priority. I always want to say exception, but priority in terms of the licensing processes, so that the very people whose information needs are being, completely not served on tribal lands would have a priority in getting these licenses, and, working on the deadlines, and then working, of course, on sourcing as many applications as we can from the public interest community, because at the last spectrum giveaway in the 80s, quite a bit was soaked up by extreme right religious organizations. And if you track, I always want to be very careful about claiming causality. I'm not claiming causality. But if you look at the map of the United States and the increase of stations in the country, it tracks remarkably to the red states, and in terms of fundamental radio stations.
So there's a success in obtaining access to media properties for local communities. There was also, about 10 years ago, a really interesting success in activism and legal activism against the, in favor of maintaining ownership caps to maintain some level of media diversity. And I think, in a way, this brings us back 10 years to say there was, I think, when Free Press came online and working with quite a number of other media policy activists, the unleashing of this this latent force for a mass movement for media policy around those ownership caps. And on the inside, you were watching this at the FCC, Michael Copps, and as one of the instigators, Michael, I just wonder if you could reflect on both of you on that moment and that achievement.
I'm happy to. Let me just wind up on the, on the low power discussion by saying that the Prometheus radio project, which has been so instrumental in making all of this happen, tells us that there's somewhere between maybe 5,000 and 10,000 applications that are going to go into the Federal Communications Commission to get a low power license authorization. We've got about 800 stations right now, and the hope is that maybe you could do as much as double or triple the number of them, which would be excellent. Yeah, I was indeed very active in that. When I went to the FCC, Chairman Powell was in the process of trying to figure out ways to loosen the media ownership rules. Those are the rules that say how many outlets one company can own. And that, of course, is what puts the brakes, if you enforce those rules, on media consolidation. I think Michael thought that, well, this is just an inside the Beltway kind of operation. Nobody really cares outside the Beltway how many outlets a company can own or any of those things. So we'll just get the submissions from the usual players, and you know who the usual players are, and vote them through. I went, and there was a colleague of mine, Jonathan Adelstein, who was the other Democratic commissioner, and we said, we'd like to take this outside the Beltway, and we looked and saw folks like Free Press who were starting up at the same time and holding meetings. Michael didn't want to finance a lot of FCC meetings around the country, so he said, if you want to do them, use up your budget, but we had little teeny budgets, so thank goodness there were groups like Free Press and Common Cause, and there were senators and congressmen who were having town hall meetings. So we went on the road, and between, I don't know how many meetings you all put on at Free Press, it was probably 40. Oh yeah, more than that, because I think Jonathan and I probably between us went to many more than that if you put 2003, and then the whole episode was repeated in 2007. But lo and behold, as we went out on the road, red state and blue state, we found out that people were very, very interested in what was going on. Some of these meetings we had would, and you folks sponsored and others, would draw 400, 500, 600 people. We learned to start them in the evening so that real working people could come out. Some would stay for 8 or 9 hours. We started some of these meetings at 5 o'clock at night, and they would last till 1 o'clock in the morning. Jonathan and I didn't leave, and you guys didn't leave. We had an open mic until the last person had spoken. But to make a long story short, all of this excited enough people, the 3 million folks, and remember this is before the day when the internet was really going viral. 3 million people contacted the FCC and Congress saying, we don't like these rules. By then, Michael Powell had gotten his Republican majority and passed the rules loosening the ownership cap. We don't like these rules. Once the grassroots had spoken like that, the United States Senate voted twice to disapprove the rules that the Powell Commission had passed.
How many
The House
comments
voted-
would you get?
Pardon?
How many comments would you get prior to that? What would your average number of comments be?
Oh, I don't think it was an issue
Dozens.
much before that. Yeah,
Hundreds.
probably. So incidentally, of the 3 million comments we got, I would say 99.9 were do away with these
Yeah.
Powell rules. So I saw members of Congress later in the year, and they said, you know, when I went home and had a town hall meeting, someone raised their hand and asked about media ownership. I never knew that that was an issue in my district or in my state. I never heard anybody raise that before. But the point is, then they came back and voted against those rules. And the House went on record against them too in a little different way, and finally the Third Circuit Court in Philadelphia said these rules are awful, send them back to the FCC, where they're still pending, by the way, and they're still alive for future action. So that showed me that even on this day when we get depressed about the power of big money and organized lobbies and all that the grassroots is still there and people can still be here. As I say, we went through this again in 2007, so it was encouraging. And I think in the age of the internet, that 3 million would probably translate into, who knows, 10, 15, 20 million people. Maybe we'll have a chance to find out.
We
on
may
the net
well.
neutrality issue.
Yeah, I would say we started Free Press with the idea that it was going to take 5 or 10 years before we even had a presence in Washington that would be of any note, because we'd have to be so busy organizing people outside of Washington to get them aware of the issue and organize, get involved. And then suddenly, I mean, it just exploded on us. These, right as we're starting Free Press, these rule changes are announced by Michael Powell, and we're fortunate to have Mike Copps and John Adelstein on the FCC, who are very sympathetic, who want to talk to people in the public, who want to do hearings. And so we sort of got 10 years of experience in about 3 months. It was really like doing West Point in the summer and getting 2 wars in, and we were ready for full battle after 6 months. The experience was extraordinary in terms of learning a lot, but it also taught us, that's why I won't repeat what Mike said, it taught us a really important lesson, which is that there is, in the American people, a real concern about their media environment. There is a deep-seated concern about the quality of their journalism, their news, their communities, how it affects their public lives, that it's almost never approached as citizens, if they're approached as consumers in that regard. But this is one of the few times they can see there's a public policy issue here. They sort of, okay, I get it. This is something I have a right to participate in and actually a duty to participate in. And when that happens, that light switch goes off, it was an explosion. It was like a bomb exploded, and it showed us what potential we had. And it also is worth noting, and this is something to keep in mind today, that I would say in March 2003, if someone had said this is going to happen in the next 3 months, they would have been locked up in an insane asylum. You said, that's impossible. How would you expect to get 3 million people across the political spectrum, huge demonstrations, to oppose media ownership rules? No one can understand these crazy rules. And it was a really important lesson to me, and one I think it's easy to forget, that we always, when we think about politics, we always look at what's happening right now and what happened just before us. We project, well, that's obviously what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day. It's impossible to understand how things can change outside of what you've just come through. So it's almost, if you think about it, why social change always seems impossible, because you just take what you've had and extrapolate from it. And this is one lesson that I think we have to teach ourselves, remind ourselves. That taught us in 2003 that wasn't the case. When I was finishing graduate school at the University of Washington in 1988, one of my professors was a white South African. And I remember I went in to see him before I left, moved to Madison, and he was really depressed. And he is an anti-apartheid activist from the 60s. He lived in America for 3 decades. And he said to me, I said, what's up? He says, well, I've been talking to my family in Cape Town, and my wife's family, they were farmers in South Africa. And they said it's hopeless now. The ruling government in South Africa, the apartheid government, will never compromise with the ANC. There's no way we will ever have justice for blacks in Africa without enormous amounts of violence, such that the country will be unlivable. This was in April 1988. 2 years later, Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island prison. 5 years later, he's president of South Africa. There's less violence than in a New Jersey bar fight. And what that tells you, though, is that, well, where you go drinking, Vince. But what that tells you is you can't predict the future. I mean, you really can't. And if you just look to the past and say, well, that's going to be the future, that's absurd. History never works that way. And I tell you right now, we're in a much more explosive period politically in this country than we've been in my lifetime. So,
well, the
stay
other thing
tuned.
I would add to, I think when we have seen this broad engagement and successes, it relates to an advantage and an opportunity, which is when you're talking about media, you have access to media personalities, popular culture figures, powerful media voices on your side, too. And I mean, I think one of the things that was unique right from the beginning with Free Press was this sort of popular culture sensibility. And I can remember the first national conference, was capped with this amazing carnival kind of night of speechifying and music, where the other FCC commissioner brought out his blues harmonica and was just stomping down with a great band, and it was a very unusual policy.
We turned his mic
discussion.
down.
Perhaps.
He
but
thought
still.
it was being heard.
Yeah, well, so anyway, it looked good. But I think
delete that from the
yeah,
record.
right, sure, it's gone, it's out there. But I do think that it's really important for these issues and for any issues that in philanthropy, understanding that the power of storytelling, media, personality, we need to engage people in the ways that they need to hear the information.
And Vince, I just want to make one more point about this, and not against that, but this is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue where we have had what our world, our more or less progressive funding world might think unusual. Christian Coalition, big ally on net neutrality. National Rifle Association was actually responsible for quite a few of those comments on net neutrality. So I think, we do a disservice if we just think about, this in terms of red states and states. And I'm the one that first mentioned red states, so I apologize for that. But, we need to really think about this as a basic human rights issue that cuts across the whole population of the world, not just the states.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? I've been keeping an eye on the Twitter stream, but is there anything in the room or outside the room that we haven't covered already? Hearing none. How about some closing comments from the front of the room?
I'll just say one word, because I'm always like the prophet of doom usually when I chronicle the issues before us and how far we have to go. But the last 10 years, and I'm really glad that both Helen and Mike touched on this, and Vince too, we've won a lot of things we wouldn't have won without the organization we did. And the victories we've won, we've mentioned just a few of them, the important victories, wouldn't have been possible except there were some very brave and courageous funders who took risks, basically, because this was not an accepted path to go down. Vince, you're one of them, but you came in the second generation. There were actually a generation before you. And I'm afraid to mention names because I know I'd forget someone and I'd live in hell for that.
The credits will run at the end of
but they know who they are, and they know we've congratulated them, thanked them personally. But there were people who took a lot of risk, and this movement doesn't take any business money. It's a rule. None of the groups do. We're nonprofit. We aren't connected to any commercial interest. We don't take government money. We depend on private donors. That's the only way we can do the work. And so you get bang for your buck in this movement. I'll tell you that. Look at what we've accomplished with the resources we've had compared to other investments. I think you say, wow, these guys really know what they're doing.
And do you want to go to me here?
Please.
There's many things I want to say. One, thank you for coming and listening to this. It's, often you mention any of these words, net neutrality, spectrum, whatever, and people just walk 10 feet away from you as quickly as they can. And I also want to salute Free Press. This is the day of their 10th anniversary party, and I hope you all will come to that. Yes, and I was in the first tier of funders at the Albert A. List Foundation, one of the early ones, and I just want to also underscore the importance of taking risk in this space in terms of funding. Many of the groups that we've funded do not look like organizations, do not look like things that would stand the test of, foundation scrutiny, and yet they have gone on to be extraordinarily successful. So take courage and work together.
Absolutely. Michael, you're a historian.
Well, I'm just sitting here kind of thinking out loud. This may be a little stream of consciousness. I don't know. But yes, I did once long ago teach history. It's almost like I think the current state of our media ecosystem is stifling the cycles of history, stifling the cycles of American history. One of the people I got to know when I went to the FCC, not that he was involved in communications, but we were fellow historians, was Arthur Schlesinger Jr. And we got to spend some time with him, and we used to go out to lunch together. But he and his father developed this theory of the cycles of American history, that you go through periods of reform and periods of reaction. And I subscribe to that. I really believe it's not inevitable or you can't predict. But it has been my feeling for years, since certainly 2000, that the American people, given the severity of the problems we face, are ready for one of those cycles of reform. You can sense it when you go to those town meetings, and they might not be able to articulate every problem, but I lay that at the feet of the media and the lapsed state of our journalism. And just incidentally, one of the things I'm doing, I'm spending this semester at the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, trying to focus on journalism and trying to see what I can do to energize young journalists to become more active as agents of change. But I really think that in, I'm going to call it enthusiasm, but that tide toward reform is there, but people have to understand, they have to have a news infrastructure that gives democracy credit, that has some basic faith in the people and their ability to handle information that they need to do. I remain an optimist. I don't know why, because I have the long agenda at the FCC. I think maybe we kept some bad things from happening, but we certainly didn't get enough good things going. But I remain.
Cheers to this man, right here.
But I do remain an optimist. I remain an optimist because I think in the final analysis, we will win out. The grassroots will speak. Common Cause, Free Press, Public Knowledge, all these other groups working with support from foundations and philanthropies can yet overcome this. Don't underestimate the steepness of the climb. Don't underestimate the forces of money and other influence that want to put the brakes on. Don't want you to make that climb. But we've been there before, and we've managed to emerge victors before. And if you don't have that basic faith in democracy, then you give up on everything. And I'm not ready to do that. So I'm an optimist. I think we can overcome, but it's going to take a lot of work.
That's great. A comment from the.
I'm Common Cause New York, and I wanted to say we've been talking about the federal level and the massive overarching struggles that we have there, but just to remind people that some of our battles are sometimes at the state level.
Yeah, no question.
Cable systems where you've got PSC, the fight we have right now around Verizon's whistling in New Jersey. So there are a lot of different levels in which we continue to work to try and keep the information flow.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That's
and I
one of
think
the things I'm
that's,
trying to focus on on this paper I'm writing at Harvard, is the necessity for journalists to cover the state houses, because so much damage has been done there. You know, I don't want to tell the whole story of the American Legislative Exchange Council here. I think you all are familiar with it. But you could elect the most progressive Congress in the world tomorrow morning, and what would they find? They would find that a lot of states have passed laws. You said 19 states where you can't build municipal broadband. 19 states putting the clamps on open elections and suppressing the vote. 19 states doing deregulate public utilities or environmental damage or whatever. So it's such an important beat, but there's almost no state house coverage left. The number of lobbyists in most state capitals is 4 or 5 times the numbers of reporters. Incidentally, one other figure goes back to the federal law. Last report that I heard, and it's been a couple of years, that there were 26 states in the United States that did not have an accredited reporter on Capitol Hill. How do you hold power accountable when you don't cover that beat?
So let me just say, we're going to now begin the next 2-hour discussion right here. Just stay in your seats. We're going to talk about local accountability journalism. No, but seriously, Just to reiterate the point that was made out of the range of our microphones, that it's important to recognize that these issues are happening at the state level too, and we've been sort of tending to focus on a federal point here. Excellent point, particularly where the preponderance of philanthropic activity in terms of numbers of funders is happening in state and regional levels. That certainly the big players are happening at a national level to a great degree or international level, but philanthropy really is a local and regional activity to a great extent. So that's an important point. And to Michael, your last point sort of thing, acknowledging that there is an appetite for reform is a very important point for us to acknowledge at a time when there is this encouraging sign among funders that there's a